14-year-old Malik Johnson testifies in court about the murder of his father, Terrence Johnson, by Officer Lucas Monroe. Despite Monroe's confidence in the seemingly biased Judge Naomi Sinclair, Malik bravely recounts the shooting, exposing the officer's lies. As the courtroom tension builds, Malik notices a judge's strange reactions, realizing she knows more than she admits. In a bold move, he accuses her directly, saying, "You're the killer." The courtroom falls into chaos, and Sinclair abruptly walks out, confirming everyone's suspicions. The trial continues without her, leading to Monroe's conviction. Days later, Sinclair resigns without explanation, hinting at deeper corruption. Though Malik's father is gone, the truth is finally out, marking a turning point in the fight for justice. A kid pointed at the judge and said, "You're the killer." Seconds later, she walked out. What was she running from? The courtroom in Birmingham, Alabama, was packed. Rows of wooden benches creaked as people shifted, whispering under their breath. The air felt thick, like a storm just before it breaks. On one side, the prosecutor's table was stacked with legal pads and documents. On the other, the defense attorney sat poised, his client, a former police officer, resting back in his chair, looking too relaxed for a man on trial for murder. But all eyes were on the witness stand. 14-year-old Malik Johnson sat stiff, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes, big and dark, darted toward the jury. 12 strangers, watching, waiting. His mother sat just a few feet away, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat. The only sign she was breathing was the slow rise and fall of her chest. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said, standing before him. Malik swallowed, adjusting the microphone. His voice came out softer than he wanted. "Malik Johnson." "And how old are you, Malik?" 14. The prosecutor nodded. He had the kind of expression that adults put on when they're trying to be gentle, but Malik could see through it. This wasn't kindness. It was strategy. "You understand why you're here today, right?" Malik's throat tightened. He didn't need to be reminded. His father's name was Terrence Johnson, a man who spent his life standing up for people who didn't have a voice. A man who once told him, "If you see something wrong, you speak on it. You don't let fear win." But fear was winning now. His fingers curled into his jeans as he forced himself to say it. "I'm here because my dad was killed." The room fell even quieter. The defense attorney didn't even look up from his papers, tapping a pen against the desk. The man Malik was testifying against, Officer Lucas Monroe, didn't move, just sat there, his mouth set in a straight line, hands folded neatly. The prosecutor took a step closer. "Tell us what you remember from that night." Malik closed his eyes for a second, pulling the memory to the surface. It wasn't hard. It was always there, waiting for him. "It was late," he began, "almost midnight. My dad had just left a meeting. He was working on something, a case about a kid who got arrested for something he didn't do." His voice faltered, but he pushed on. "We stopped at a gas station. My dad was at the pump, and I went inside to grab a soda. And then," the word stuck in his throat. He could still hear it, the sharp crack of a gunshot. The way time seemed to stretch in those few seconds. The courtroom wasn't just silent now. It was waiting. Malik cleared his throat. "I heard the shot, and I ran outside. My dad was," his breath hitched, "on the ground. There was blood, and the man standing over him had a gun." The prosecutor nodded, giving him space to continue. "Do you see that man in the courtroom today?" Malik's eyes snapped to the defense table. Officer Monroe met his gaze. Not a flicker of emotion. "Yeah." His voice was steady now. "It's him." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge lifted a hand, silencing it. The prosecutor took a step forward. "Officer Monroe claims your father threatened him, that he feared for his life. Did you see anything that would suggest your father was violent?" Malik's jaw clenched. "No, my dad wasn't like that." The prosecutor nodded. "Then tell us, did he have a weapon?" Malik's fingers dug into his knee. His heart pounded so loud he could hear it. "No, he didn't have anything." The prosecutor turned to the jury, letting those words sink in, but the defense attorney suddenly shifted, adjusting his tie, his voice smooth as he interjected. "Objection, Your Honor," he said. "The witness was inside the store at the time of the shooting. He can't possibly say for certain what happened before he ran out." The judge, Judge Naomi Sinclair, barely blinked. She turned toward the prosecutor. "Sustain. Rephrase the question." Malik's stomach twisted. The judge's face was unreadable. She wasn't looking at him, just at her notes. But something about her felt wrong, like she already knew the ending to this story. But Malik wasn't done talking yet. Malik's grip on the armrest tightened, his heart hammering against his ribs. The judge's voice was even, almost too calm, as she addressed the prosecutor. "You may continue," she said, flipping a page in her notes like this was any other trial, like his father's life was just another case file. The prosecutor cleared his throat, refocusing. "Malik, when you ran outside after hearing the gunshot." Focusing. "Malik, when you ran outside after hearing the gunshot, did you see your father do anything aggressive?" Malik shook his head. "No." "Did you hear him say anything?" He hesitated, trying to remember. The gas station lights had cast long shadows across the pavement, making everything feel warped and unreal. But his father's voice, he could still hear it, faint but clear. "Yeah," Malik said. He said, "Please." Silence. The words sat in the air, heavy. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Just please." Malik nodded. "That's all I heard. Just please." His mother let out a shaky breath from the front row. The defense attorney shifted again, setting down his pen, preparing to pounce. The prosecutor turned toward the jury. "So, let's be clear. Your father's last words weren't a threat. He wasn't attacking anyone. He was begging." Malik finished. The defense attorney sighed. Standing, his suit was crisp, expensive, the kind of fabric that didn't wrinkle under pressure. "Malik," he said, voice smooth, measured, "I know this is difficult, but you were inside the store when the incident happened. Is it possible that your father reached for something? Maybe the officer thought he saw a weapon." Malik's chest tightened. He knew what they were doing, try and turn his father into a threat, even from a grave. He shook his head. "No." "You're absolutely sure?" "Yes." The defense attorney glanced toward the jury, planting the seed of doubt. Then, with a small sigh, he sat back down, like he'd just proven his point. Malik could feel it happening, the way people's faces changed, how the room wasn't fully on his side, like the truth wasn't enough. Judge Sinclair watched without reaction, and for the first time, Malik really looked at her. Her hair was neat, dark strands streaked with gray, pulled back into a perfect knot. Her black robe sat stiff against her shoulders. She wasn't old, maybe in her mid-50s, but something about her felt worn, like someone who'd seen a lot, then a lot, and made peace with it. Except now, as she studied him, something flickered behind her expression, a memory, a hesitation. It was gone too fast to tell. The prosecutor straightened his tie, pressing forward. "Malik, do you remember what happened after the police arrived?" Malik's jaw tensed. "Yeah. They put me in a squad car, said they needed me out of the way." The defense attorney's voice cut in. "For your protection, correct?" Malik turned toward him. "No, they never told me that." A hush spread across the room. The prosecutor seized a moment. "So, just to clarify, your father was unarmed, shot by an off-duty officer, and instead accompanying you, the police locked you in a squad car?" Malik nodded. "Yeah. Did they let you see your father?" His throat tightened. "No." His mother closed her eyes, gripping her hands in her lap. The prosecutor turned toward the jury, but Jamia's focus was on the judge. And that's when it happened. A flicker, so quick, so faint, but he saw it. The way her fingers clenched just slightly. The way her jaw shifted, almost imperceptibly, like she knew something, but she wasn't saying it. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't just about one bad cop. Something bigger was buried here. But Malik wasn't ready to let it stay buried. Malik's pulse pounded in his ears. His eyes flickered between Judge Sinclair and Officer Monroe. There was something here. Something just beneath the surface. Judge Sinclair's gaze had shifted. Not by much, but enough. She wasn't staring at him anymore. She was looking past him, like she was somewhere else entirely. like she already knew the ending of this trial. Malik's breath caught. His father always told him to watch people's eyes. People will lie to you with their words, but their eyes will always tell the truth. And Judge Sinclair's eyes, they were hiding something. The prosecutor kept speaking, but Malik's mind was racing. Something about this didn't make sense. The defense attorney had been quick to dismiss him. Too quick. The judge had barely reacted to anything he said. And Monroe wasn't nervous. A man on trial for murder should have been nervous. Malik stared at the officer's hands, steady, controlled, as if he knew he wouldn't face real consequences. And then it hit him. That's because he didn't expect to. The system was already working in his favor. The judge, the lawyers, the jury, they were all playing their parts. A chill spread through Malik's chest. But then a memory surfaced. His father's voice, calm, firm, the way he always sounded when he was explaining something important. If you see something wrong, you speak on it. You don't let fear win. Malik licked his lips. His palms were sweaty, his heart drumming fast, but he sat up straighter. He turned his gaze directly to Judge Sinclair, and then he said it. "You're the killer." The words cut through the courtroom like a blade. Every muscle in the room went tight. The prosecutor's mouth fell open. The defense attorney's pen slipped from his fingers. The jurors stiffened in their seats. Even Monroe, so composed, so certain, tilted his head slightly, just enough to reveal that he wasn't expecting that. But the judge barely moved. Her fingers twitched against the gavel. Her lips pressed into a thin line. A second stretched, then another. The air in the room thickened. Malik didn't blink. He could feel his mother's breathage behind him, could hear the distant murmurs from the spectators, but none of that mattered, because Judge Sinclair still hadn't said a word. That flicker, it was back, a flash of something. Recognition, guilt, fear. The silence dragged on, and then, in the slowest, most controlled movement possible, Judge Sinclair leaned forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was dangerously even. "Excuse me," but Malik didn't back down. He could feel the weight of the room pressing on him. The unspoken rules, the way everyone was waiting for him to crack, to walk it back, to apologize. But he wouldn't. He wasn't lying. He wasn't confused. He saw it in her face. And suddenly the pieces started clicking together. The way she had dismissed key details in the case. The way she had sustained objections at the wrong moments. The way her hands clenched every time Monroe's name was mentioned. She knew something. Malik swallowed. His voice was quieter now, but no less certain. "You knew." The room exhaled, not in relief but in shock. Judge Sinclair didn't move, but her knuckles were white against the bench. She wasn't denying it. The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is an outrageous accusation from a child." But the damage was done. The courtroom wasn't just watching anymore. They were listening. And for the first time, Malik wasn't the one who looked nervous. The judge was. But the truth was already out. The tension in the courtroom had shifted. No one was whispering anymore. No one was shifting in their seats. Everyone was just staring. Judge Sinclair's hand stayed still on the bench, but Malik saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed. She was rattled. She glanced toward the defense table, too quickly, and for the first time, Officer Monroe was relaxed. His jaw clenched, and his eyes darted toward the judge like he was waiting for her to fix this, to regain control. But she didn't. She couldn't, because the room had already changed. Malik could feel it, the shift in the air. People were questioning now. The jury, the spectators, even the bailiff by the door. Everyone was looking at her differently. The prosecutor hesitated, then finally spoke. "Your Honor, perhaps we should take a brief recess." "No," Judge Sinclair said sharply, too sharply. A pause. Then she cleared her throat, folded her hands neatly in front of her. "Proceed," she said, but her voice had lost its steadiness. The prosecutor turned back to Malik. "Son, I need you to clarify. What do you mean by that statement?" Malik's heart pounded, but he knew what he meant. He kept his eyes on Judge Sinclair. "My dad wasn't just killed," he said, voice steady. "He was targeted. A murmur rippled through the room. Judge Sinclair lifted a hand. "That's enough, young man." "No, it's not." Malik's mother stood up. The entire courtroom turned. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shouting. She just stood there, her hands shaking, her face pale but set with something unmovable. And then she asked a question no one else had dared to ask. "How do you know Officer Monroe, Judge?" It was so quiet now that Malik could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Judge Sinclair didn't answer. She didn't have to. Malik saw it in her face. The way her breath caught, the way her eyes flickered toward Monroe, for the briefest second. But it was enough. The prosecutor turned toward the bench. "Your Honor, I said enough," Judge Sinclair snapped. But she was unraveling. She was gripping the gavel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Malik could feel his pulse in his throat. He didn't know the whole story, not yet, but he knew one thing for certain. This was bigger than just one case. This wasn't about a random shooting. This was about protection, about power, about a system that made sure men like Officer Monroe walked free. And now, the cracks were showing. Judge Sinclair stood. "This court is adjourned," she said, and she walked out. She didn't look at Monroe. She didn't look at Malik. She just left. And in her absence, the courtroom exploded. The courtroom was chaos. The jury exchanged uncertain glances. The prosecutor whispered something hurriedly to his team. Spectators murmured, some already reaching for their phones. The judge had walked out. That wasn't supposed to happen. Malik sat frozen in the witness chair. His mother clutched his shoulder, her fingers trembling. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. A shift, a break in the pattern. Officer Monroe hadn't moved. He sat still, his face unreadable. But his eyes flickered with something close to panic. The defense attorney stood, pulling at his collar. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll reconvene soon. I'm sure, Judge Sinclair." She ran. Someone from the jury muttered, and that changed everything. The prosecutor straightened. He turned toward the judge's empty chair, then at Monroe. His lips pressed together like he just made a decision. "We motion proceed without Judge Sinclair," he said, his voice sharp now. "We request an emergency replacement and continue deliberations immediately." A beat of silence. Then the bailiff spoke. "Court will reconvene in 30 minutes. The tension snapped. Spectators rushed toward the doors, reporters already dialing numbers, lawyers murmuring among themselves. But Malik just sat there. He could feel it. Something was shifting. Maybe for once, things wouldn't be buried. 30 minutes later, they brought in a substitute judge, someone neutral, someone who didn't have ties to Monroe. The jury deliberated for hours. Malik sat beside his mother, staring at the wall, waiting. He didn't pray. He wasn't sure who would be listening, but he thought of his father, of the way he always believed in justice, even when it failed him. And then, finally, the jury returned. 12 people took their seats. Some looked tired. Some looked angry. The foreperson stood. The room held its breath. "We, the jury, find a defendant." A pause. Then guilty. The courtroom erupted. Monroe's face finally changed. His hands gripped the edge of the table, his lips parting like he couldn't believe it. The defense attorney closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. Malik's mother sank into her seat, covering her mouth. For the first time in a long time, she looked lighter. The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. The bailiff approached Monroe, motioning for him to stand. A conviction, a real one. But Malik wasn't celebrating. Not yet. He turned toward the door. Judge Sinclair was gone, and something told him this wasn't over. 1 week later, the story exploded across the news. Former Officer Lucas Monroe, convicted of murder. Judge walks out of courtroom after shocking accusation. Was justice almost denied? People were talking about Monroe, about Sinclair, about the system that let them get this far. And then, late one night, Malik's mother got a call. Judge Sinclair resigned. That was it. No press conference. No explanation. She was just gone. But Malik knew what that meant. She ran because she was guilty of something. Maybe not pulling the trigger, but of protecting the people who did. His father was gone. That wouldn't change. But for the first time, truth didn't die with him. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something different. The fight for justice isn't just about one case. It's about breaking the cycle, calling out the system, and refusing to let the truth get buried. If you believe in standing up for what's right, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because stories like this, they deserve to be heard. Thanks for watching.